You were told your best years were your 20s, that if you didn't make it by 30, you never would. So you rushed. You performed. You sacrificed parts of yourself to keep up with a timeline written by people who didn't even know who they were. I wish I'd known sooner that this timeline was the greatest lie we're ever told. But then you wake up at 40, and what you see might terrify you or finally set you free. You did everything they told you to. Went to school, got the job, followed the plan. You worked hard, smiled politely, buried your doubts, and tried to stay grateful. You chased success in your 20s like your life depended on it, because that's what they made you believe. That this was your shot, your window, your one chance to matter before the world moved on without you. But now you're older. You're past the noise, and something doesn't sit right. Because despite everything, the titles, the house, the relationship, the checkboxes, you feel hollow, disconnected, like you've been playing someone else's character this whole time. If I'd understood this earlier, I might have saved myself years of chasing the wrong validation. Carl Jung saw it coming. He called the first half of life a necessary illusion, a phase ruled by ego, image, and survival. A time where we build the persona we think will protect us. But here's the catch. The persona always fails because it's not built for truth. It's built for applause. It's designed to make you lovable, not whole. So you spend your 20s and 30s crafting a version of yourself that earns praise but drains your soul. And you don't even realize it until around 40 when the mask starts to crack. You wake up one morning and nothing is wrong, but everything is wrong. The job you once chased now feels suffocating. The relationship feels shallow. The friends feel distant. The dreams you once had feel like they belong to someone else. It's not depression, it's awakening. Carl Jung said the real journey of life doesn't begin until 40, because before that you are not truly you. You are a collage of what others expected you to be. And once you hit that middle point, your psyche begins to revolt. You feel restless, empty, rebellious. Not because you failed, but because success without self-awareness is just another prison. The first half of life is about building the structure. The second half is about breaking it open. But this is where most people panic, because they've spent decades building an identity. And now life is asking them to let go of it, to stop pretending, to stop performing, to meet the shadow, to ask the questions they were always too afraid to ask. What if I don't love this life I built? What if the real me was buried under the version I became to survive? What if my greatest achievement was just my biggest distraction? These are not midlife crisis questions. These are midlife revelations, and they come with pain. Because if you've spent 40 years trying to be good, a good daughter, good husband, good employee, good friend, then finally asking who you are can feel like betrayal. But it's not betrayal, it's birth. The birth of the self. Jung called it individuation. The process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not liked, whole. And wholeness requires integration. Not just your strengths, but your shadows. Not just your dreams, but your regrets. Not just your pride, but your grief. It asks you to stop running from your childhood wounds, your inner rage, your spiritual hunger, from all the parts you've suppressed, to keep your world intact. Because at 40, you finally see the world was never stable, and neither were you. You were held together by roles, by reputation, by pretending, but now pretending has become unbearable, and real has become non-negotiable. I wish I'd known sooner that the mask I thought was protecting me was actually suffocating me. That's why so many people hit 40 and feel like they're falling apart. But they're not. They're falling into place. Because the life you built before 40, it wasn't wrong. It was just incomplete. It was research, practice, preparation. But now the real life actually begins. Not the one built for others. The one built by truth. So here's the question you have to face. If the first half of your life was survival, what does it mean to actually live in the second? Because once you start asking that, you can't go back to sleep. You can't unsee the hollowness. You can't unknow your own depth. You either wake up and rebuild, or spend the rest of your life grieving the self you never got to become. The first half of life is about becoming who the world wanted. The second half is about becoming who you were always meant to be. And it starts now. When everything feels like it's ending, that's when it finally begins. You weren't supposed to make it here. Not here, where you start questioning everything you built. Not here where the image no longer satisfies. Not here where you begin choosing truth over tradition. Because this moment, this quiet internal rebellion around 40 terrifies the world around you. Why? Because you're not supposed to wake up. You're supposed to keep performing, keep buying, keep hustling, keep believing that settling down means settling for less of yourself. Society has an unspoken rule. Once you hit 40, you're expected to shrink, play it safe, stop asking questions, become predictable, become passive, retire your curiosity, retire your sexuality, retire your rebellion. You're supposed to disappear into routine, not reappear as something new. But Jung knew better. He wrote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life, according to the program of life's morning." Translation: the rules that got you here won't get you where your soul is meant to go next. Because what worked at 20, ambition, conformity, image, is killing you at 40. And the world can't handle that because your awakening threatens the entire structure. You start asking dangerous questions. Why am I still chasing approval? Why do I feel lonelier now than I did when I had nothing? Why do I keep pretending this version of life is enough? And suddenly, you're not just a person with questions. You're a threat to every person who never asked them. Because when one person wakes up, they light a fire in others. And the system doesn't want fire. It wants control. Society invented labels: midlife crisis, burnout, empty nest, to pathologize what is actually spiritual evolution. You're not broken, you're becoming. But if they can convince you this transformation is a problem, you'll go back to sleep. I wish I'd understood sooner that what they call a crisis is actually your soul demanding authenticity. They want you to fear reinvention, because reinventing yourself at 40 proves one terrifying truth: it's never too late to become real. And if that's true, it threatens the millions of people still living fake lives. So they'll call you selfish, irrational, immature, going through something. But the truth is, you're finally coming home. You're peeling off the mask, the one you thought was permanent, the one you thought was you. And in its place, something ancient is waking up, something powerful, something real. It's the self, not the ego, not the role, not the performance, the self, the full integration of shadow and light, the part of you that never needed approval to exist, the part that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. But here's the hard truth. Waking up at 40 means realizing you spent 2 decades building someone else's dream, and now you have to tear it down. Not out of regret, but out of necessity, because your soul can't live in a house built by fear. And this is why society fears you. Because once you realize you're not stuck, you start moving. You leave the job. You end the performance of marriage. You travel. You start creating. You start saying no. You stop apologizing. And that kind of person breaks the system. Carl Jung believed the second half of life wasn't about doing more. It was about becoming whole. And wholeness is dangerous to a culture built on fragmentation. When you become whole, you no longer need external permission to exist. You don't care if they understand. You don't need them to agree. You stop waiting for someone to validate your evolution. You just become. And in that becoming, you activate a power society can't market, measure, or manage. You begin to trust your intuition over instruction. You follow inner alignment, not outer applause. You stop chasing youth, because you finally realize this moment right now is the beginning of your real life. I wish someone had told me earlier that the second half of life isn't about declining. It's about finally arising. So here's what they never wanted you to realize. You're not running out of time. You're running out of lies. You're shedding everything that isn't true. Everything that was convenient, safe, impressive, but not you. You're stepping into a phase of life where authenticity matters more than attention, depth matters more than charm, solitude matters more than popularity, and meaning matters more than legacy. This is the beginning of everything you buried to survive. It's not a crisis, it's the return. You feel it, that pull, a tension under the skin, a whisper in your gut, something telling you this isn't it. There's more. You were meant for more, but you silence it. You tell yourself it's just stress, just fatigue, just a bad week. You call it normal because that's what everyone else calls it too. But it's not normal. It's the call, the quiet, unmistakable invitation to change, to wake up, to stop sleepwalking through a life that looks fine but feels fake. Carl Jung warned us, thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life. Worse still, we take this step with the false assumption that our truths and ideals will serve us as hitherto. But they don't. They can't. The ego rules the first half, but the second half is spiritual territory, soul territory, and the tools that got you here, ambition, pleasing, performance, start to turn against you. If you don't answer the call, your life begins to harden, not from age, from repetition. You start living on autopilot. Same job, same conversations, same emotional dead zone. You become numb, functional, reliable, but absent. You scroll more, you drink more, you fantasize about quitting it all, but never do. And slowly, your soul begins to rot. That's the cost of ignoring the call. It doesn't ruin you, it dulls you. And that's worse, because when you're dull, you stop feeling, you stop imagining, you stop becoming, you settle, not because you're content, but because you're exhausted by the war between your truth and your routine. Jung would say, you're being haunted by your unlived life. The version of you that was curious, brave, creative, raw, unfiltered. That self is still inside you, and it's getting louder, but if you don't answer it, the voice becomes bitterness. That's the hidden consequence. Bitterness, the quiet rage of a life that betrayed its own potential. It shows up as passive aggression, snapping at your partner, judging others for their freedom, mocking people who reinvent themselves because you never gave yourself permission to. You begin to resent joy, to resent change, to resent the mirror because deep down, you know you chose comfort over becoming, and now you're a stranger to yourself. You scroll through old photos and don't recognize the eyes. You hear your own laughter in videos and wonder when it made it sounding so fake. You look in the mirror and see someone competent, but not alive. And the longer you ignore the call, the more life numbs you just so you can survive the disconnect. You live in your head, you lose time, you stop dreaming, you stop desiring, you stop deserving, and that's the final stage, self-abandonment, the quiet death that comes from being present in a life where your soul was never invited. You say things like, I'm just too old to start over, I have responsibilities, this is just how it is, and no one questions it, because that's what most people say. It's what most people believe. But most people are asleep. You were not meant to be. You were meant to burn, to bloom, to break and rebuild, to start again. Not in spite of your age, but because of it. Jung didn't call 40 a breakdown. He called it a threshold, the doorway to individuation, to authenticity, to wholeness. But most people stop there. They hear the knock and pretend it's nothing. So life knocks louder in the form of divorce, anxiety, depression, health scares, existential dread, not to punish you, but to wake you, because the self does not go quiet. It waits, and when it's time, it demands your return. But the longer you wait, the more healing it will take to come back. So the real question isn't what happens if I change everything at 40. The real question is, what will it cost me if I don't? I wish I'd understood sooner that what feels like falling apart is actually the beginning of finding yourself. And it starts quietly. Not with a plan, not with a new job, not with a plane ticket or bold declaration. It starts with something smaller, a decision. You wake up one morning and realize the version of you the world loves is not the version of you that feels alive. So you stop. You sit in the silence. And for the first time in years, you ask yourself, what if I let it all go? The expectations, the mask, the performance, the safety net that's been strangling your soul. And from that single question, you begin not to fix your life, but to reclaim it. Because somewhere along the way, you handed pieces of yourself to people who didn't know what they were holding. Your fire, your curiosity, your untamed voice, all for a kind of belonging that never truly belonged to you. But at 40, something shifts. The fear of change becomes smaller than the fear of never changing. You realize the real risk isn't losing what you've built, it's wasting what you could still become. Carl Jung called this the second half of life, a sacred stage where the ego is no longer king and the self demands the throne. This isn't reinvention, it's recovery. You're not becoming someone new, you're becoming who you were before the world edited you. You start speaking differently, slower, with intention. You no longer speak to impress. You speak to connect. You set boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. You stop chasing people who only loved your silence. You stop apologizing for your sensitivity. You stop negotiating your truth. You start reading again, painting, sitting in stillness, walking for no reason other than the sound of your own breath. You stop filling every empty space with noise because you're no longer afraid of the silence. You trust it. This is how you break free. Not by burning it all down overnight, but by taking back 1 inch of your life at a time. You realize you don't need a crisis to justify change. You just need permission, and that permission, only you can give it. I wish someone had told me sooner that permission to change doesn't come from others, it comes from within. You stop looking for signs. You become the sign. There's a peace in your presence now. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped pretending it was fine when it wasn't. You've chosen depth over comfort, truth over approval, uncertainty over predictability, and that choice, it rewrites your future. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating every part of yourself, even the ones that once made you ashamed. And now you carry your shadow with pride, not as a burden, but as evidence that you survived what tried to bury you. You know who you are now, not because someone told you, but because you listened to the voice you spent decades ignoring. I wish I'd known earlier that peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from finally asking the right questions. You're not too old, you are right on time. You didn't miss your moment, you were becoming ready for it. So here's the truth. Your second life doesn't begin when you escape your past. It begins when you stop betraying yourself to protect it. And once you choose that, you don't need permission to become powerful. You just need honesty. And now you have both. You look back, not with regret but with clarity. You thought you were behind, that life had passed you by, that everyone else had it figured out, while you were still searching. But now you see it clearly. You were never late. You were just becoming. Every detour, every breakdown, every silent scream you swallowed, it all shaped the doorway to this moment. Because the real you, the one that feels whole when alone, the one that speaks with truth instead of fear, the one that doesn't beg to be seen, was never gone, only waiting for you to come back. And now you've returned, not as the person they expected, not as the version that kept them comfortable, but as something deeper, unapologetic, unfiltered, alive. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This is that privilege not given but earned through the fire, through the silence, through the brutal, beautiful process of remembering yourself. You didn't miss your moment, you are the moment, and you don't need to catch up. You only need to go inward, because everything real, everything sacred starts after you stop pretending. I wish I'd understood sooner that becoming who you truly are isn't a straight path. It's a spiral that keeps returning you to yourself, with deeper understanding each time. So now you stand here, not ahead, not behind, but exactly where you're meant to be. And the only question left to ask is this: if your real life actually begins now, what are you finally ready to become? You weren't late, you were evolving. And now it's time. If you've been silent for years, holding it together while falling apart inside, comment below. I'm ready to live. Let the world know your second life begins now.